live on Facebook. Welcome everybody to On the Air with ANEA. My name is Edric Figueroa. I'm the coalition coordinator with the Act Now and AIDS Coalition. Excited to spend this next hour with you. So ANEA is a coalition of community-based organizations, health departments, national organizations, and activists really committed to ending the HIV epidemic through community leadership and community solutions. So it was founded in 2016, and since its inception, it's really been focused on how we build leadership from people living with HIV and the communities most impacted by HIV, meaning to say people of color, transgender communities, and all the other communities we know all of y'all are working with all the time. So this is the 5th episode of On the Air with ANEA. Every month, we bring you another topic that's relevant to ending the epidemic, and we try to discuss it from several different perspectives, community, government, or other. And today's episode will feature 4 amazing leaders who are going to talk about radical community care. So how they're putting people first in what they're doing and the services that they're offering in the community. We're inspired by each of our guests' ability to really center the needs and the voices of the folks that they work with. So before we jump in, quick logistic stuff. If you're joining us on the Zoom, we ask that you turn your camera and mic off. There will be a portion time to share that. We would love some interaction later, but for the first half an hour or so, we'd like to just interact with our guests. I'm very lucky to be joined by my co-host and co-conspirator, Crystal Townsend, who is the End HIV Houston coordinator. So Crystal, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and the guests.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here on the last day of Women's History Month and Trans Day of Visibility. I'm happy to be here with y'all. My name is Crystal Townsend. I coordinate End HIV Houston, which is a grassroots community-driven coalition that's focusing on ending the HIV epidemic in Harris County. I'm in Texas, and so we've been doing this work since about 2016. We're also a part of the Act Now End AIDS Coalition, so I'm so happy to be here with y'all talking about radical community care today. So I'm excited about this because there are often so much happening. There's often so much happening in our communities that we don't get to highlight or uplift, and there's so much good work being done. And so this is our time to really shine a light on people and organizations that are doing the work. So we're happy to have Jessie Pratt Lopez, the founder and co-director of the Trans Housing Coalition. Rashawn Gilmore. Rashawn is a part of the Black Treatment Advocates Network in Kansas City and is also the founder of Blackout in Kansas City, Missouri. Devin Hursey, also a part of the Black Treatment Advocates Network in Kansas City, and also a part of the Missouri HIV, the HIV Justice Coalition. This is a good one, and I want to hear more about that one, Devin. And then last but not least, we have Lonnetta Wilson. Lonnetta is the Ending the Epidemic coordinator at Tarrant County. So thank you for being here, Lonnetta, and sharing your experience and perspective from the health department side. So thank y'all. I want to start it off by asking y'all, we're talking about how we are caring for our communities, really at the core. So radical means at the root. How we are providing this care to our communities. I want to ask y'all, how are you radically caring for yourself in this moment where we see so much violence against Black, Indigenous, and communities of color? Right now, we are seeing violence against our Asian communities. And so I'm wondering how y'all are radically caring for yourself. So it could be music, a little Meg Thee Stallion, a little, therapy. How are you caring for yourself, Lonnetta?
I'll take that first. I'm caring for myself just by leaning on others with shared beliefs. I'm so fortunate to work with a great group of like-minded individuals who allow me to lean on them when I'm struggling with those thoughts of of things that are going on in our community and just in the world. Like you mentioned, Crystal, there's so much going on. How do you decompress and kind of deal with that so we can push our work forward? And the way I do that is just by leaning on to my friends and those folks that I'm in close relationships with.
I love that. What about you, Jesse?
Oof, this is one of the hardest questions. Self-care, you know, it's been the trend, but I mean, people always say, you know, if you don't take care of yourself, you know, how can you take care of others? For me, it's been very difficult during this pandemic, especially working from home, you know, separating, you know, the work, you know, from everything else, especially with, like y'all said, so much going on, so much trauma in our communities that we're constantly having to deal with and heal. One way is with actually a gardening collective that Edric and I are part of, Mariposas Rebeldes, and we gather almost weekly in doing different programming, different gardening activities, and it's kind of like an escape from the day-to-day of, you know, working from home. And gardening has just been one of the things throughout the pandemic that I found community in, have reconnected, you know, to my Latinx community with. And it's one of those things where it allows me to decompress and just be outside, because we're all like trapped inside all the time on these Zoom calls. So I would say that's one of the main ways, because otherwise I'm going crazy.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I learned about the work that y'all are doing with the gardening in Atlanta through your recent write-up in Vogue.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that's how I learned about it. I was like, this is beautiful. And then the pictures were dope. And then I talked to Edric. I was like, okay, let me find out you famous.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, that was beautiful. So, and we'll share the link so y'all can see it too. It was really, really great. What about you, Devin?
Hey everybody. So I'm one of those people, I listen to music, and it's kind of funny because I took some time to rediscover Madonna's Erotica. I know of all people to listen to and of all albums, the one that didn't do well. But you know, just doing a critical listen of Erotica, it's like, it's so affirming and it's so validating. And I feel like as a culture, we're so ready for the conversation that she wanted to have in that album that was not well received. So, I mean, it's a way for me to listen to something that's actually affirming and escape from whatever my situation is.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. Like, what is your favorite song from that album?
So I've taken a liking to Bad Girl and to In This Life. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. Well, we might have to start like a playlist for ANEA, Edric. That would be dope. Okay, what about you, Rashawn?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm here for the playlist. So whoever wants to pull that together or whoever's accepting submissions, you want to get that popping on Apple Music, I'm here for it. Okay, so I will tell you all how I have been making it through the last several months, if you promise not to laugh at me. Because while it's been friends and family for sure has helped to kind of keep my mentals in check, I stumbled upon a show on Netflix that I just became consumed with. No, it's not Bridgerton. There's not a bunch of drama and sex and intrigue. It's the Great British Baking Show. And I don't know why it has become the absolute best escape for me. And perhaps it's because it's so distant from my day-to-day reality. And it is competitive. It's a reality show, but it is so good. Thank you for not judging me, Crystal. I appreciate it. It is so good. And so I literally watched all 8 seasons from the back to the beginning, and now I'm struggling for something new to watch. So y'all pray for me because I find some new TV to submerge myself into.
Dude, speed up.
So Lonnetta said, can we add a Netflix watch list too? And I think we should. So, I mean, I'm not gonna judge you, but I will if it's trash.
Yeah, it might be garbage, not quite to the level of trash. I don't know.
I love reality TV. So, that's a level of trash that, I enjoy. Okay, Edric, I don't want to leave you out. How are you taking care of yourself right now?
Yeah. So Mariposas Rebeldes, just the few times I get to get my hands in dirt are always a good reminder of like, hey, we're just like seeds. We need water, we need earth, we need nutrients. So that's definitely something that's helped me grow, to continue with the plant metaphor through this pandemic.
Metaphors.
I love that. And so I guess our first question to the group is, you all have some organizations, you have created organizations, you are doing work that is so unique and essential. And I want to know, Jesse, from you first, like what inspired you to create the Trans Housing Coalition?
Oof. Well, first of all, I don't come from, I have an art background. I went to school for photography, got my BFA in photography, but I've always, had been at the intersection of art and activism. I come from a family of artists and activists. Well, my dad's a journalist and my mom's an art teacher. So my father always instilled that in me through his journalism. And THC came about from actually a personal passion project that I was doing while I was still in school, from a community of Black trans sex workers that I became really close with on the streets that lived near me in Old Fourth Ward. And I began photographing them, and then it became a project, something that was between me and them. But then I was researching and realizing, trying to find them resources for housing, and that there was, barely any resources in Atlanta for housing specifically for trans people. And the people that have been doing the work, like the Trans Housing Atlanta program, they didn't have the resources at the time to help the community that I was trying to help. So I put together, sorry, there's a long story. With the photographs, I decided that, in the spirit of mutual aid, in the spirit of queerness and transness, that, we've always been the only people, ultimately at the end of the day, that are out here for each other. When the rest of the world turned their back on us, I created a crowdfunding campaign for the girls using my photographs, and it was with the intention of really getting them off the streets, just at least for the holidays, and until we could find, more sustainable resources. It voted pretty well, was able to do that, for a couple weeks. But of course, with the amount of need that there is, the amount of girls that were on the streets wasn't able to be long-term. This happened on and off, donations came in for a couple months. I kept, looking for other resources, couldn't find any. And then I was really giving up. I was really getting disillusioned. And it wasn't until the June of 2020 when the fund received new life. It became viral after the resurgence of Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically with the focus on Black trans lives. And it went viral, and I was given this opportunity to really attack this problem that has plagued the trans community, especially the Black trans community, for so long. So when that happened, I knew that, I had this opportunity. So I put together a community advisory board of Black trans activists and trans activists in Atlanta. And we decided that building a project and a coalition that specifically addressed this issue hands-on was the best and only way to go about this. So yeah, that answers your question.
I love that, and thank you for sharing all of that. It brought up a lot for me. I don't know about y'all, and again, if you're in the Zoom room, like throw your thoughts or your reflections in the chat and questions, and then we'll get them answered. But it made me think about the importance of movement work. And no matter how much people try to like diminish the impact of Black Lives Matter or the efforts being done by organizers on the ground, we know it has impacts that really come back to our community. So I love to hear that story, and I want to see some of the art. So I want to check it out, and I want us to share it online too. I want to ask the same question to Rashawn, like what inspired you to start Blackout?
It was really sort of based out of need. And while I get a lot of credit and attention for the work that the organization is doing, it really is our staff and our board who make up the heartbeat of the organization. And that includes folks like Devin, who are on the Zoom with us today. But, you know, we realized that upon completion of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar CDC grant that I was running at a local FQHC here, that all the momentum that had been built was at a risk of being lost, because funding comes and funding goes. The challenge for us is that we have this situation where our community gets left behind, and every 3 to 5 years, we've got to regenerate or reboot, start all over again. And we needed to develop a leadership core. And we had a problem here that many cities face, which is that those who have the capacity to lead often don't have the desire. And then many times those who have the desire to lead often don't have the capacity. And so you end up with this sort of big donut hole that needed to be filled. And so our goal was to create a leadership core, but we wanted to do it differently. We are big on self-determination, self-agency for ourselves as individuals, as well as for our community. And so we decided that the first thing to do was to partner with one of our research universities here, the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and their community health research group, to do a broad health needs assessment for our community. And there were people who tried to get us to be part of the larger one and said, oh, well, you can just be a part of this one. But we knew that we would just get diluted in that larger study of predominantly white MSM. And so we just did not want that. But this gave us an opportunity to, well, as I always say, data drives dollars, to put ourselves in the driver's seat. And so that became the foundation of it and where we're going. And we'll talk some more later on, Crystal, I know, about the actual work we're doing right now, but it's quite a contrast between what we're doing and what some of the very heavily resourced aid service organizations, FQHCs, and others are doing. And we're outpacing them in significant ways, particularly around ending the epidemic and its goals.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so I want to bring Devin into the conversation because Rashawn, you mentioned that Devin is a part of Blackout, and y'all also sit on the Black Treatment Advocates Network, or BTAN-Kansas City, together. So Devin, I want to hear about your relationship to Blackout. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that work, and also like BTAN. So talk about BTAN and how that started, and also your relationship to Blackout.
Oh, that's a lot.
I'm sure.
What should I touch on? So I'll say this. Thank you, Jesse. I just want to point you out. I was attending Morehouse. I attended Morehouse for a while, and when I left the school, I came home, and that's when I got my HIV diagnosis. Like within months of me returning home. So looks like that's where my exposure was in Atlanta. So, you know, I came home newly diagnosed. I was connected to care, and there was Rashawn, the one Black gay man within the community doing the work. So, you know, that's where we first connected. At the time, it was around the time where I met Edric, doing work for Greater Than AIDS. So I felt like I was isolated. I had a very small community that it did include Rashawn, but you know, I was also doing the work. So resources were limited in Kansas City. I identified that need, having come from Atlanta. I knew what these services could look like. And so I kind of shared my networks with anybody who was interested. And I also looked for other ways to like really get involved, because when you're in a community like mine, I just felt very disempowered. I felt like people wanted to give me medication and they didn't want me to say anything about it, or they wanted to give me whatever care they felt like they could give me. That's back when I was cussing out nurses. I was going off on people. They just gave me subpar treatment and care. there was one time one of Rashawn's coworkers went up to him and to me separately and said that I'm trying to use my HIV diagnosis to pursue ambitions. And it's like, I just know that I'm the expert and I know that what you're giving me is stigmatizing. And Rashawn was like, well, that's the point, is for him to use his status to pursue other ambitions because there's bigger and better out there. But yeah, so I've been working with Rashawn since he conceived of this idea to create Blackout. I've done my best to really be in his corner. Beyond that, a lot of my work is focused on just creating networks of people living with HIV. I feel like people living with HIV should be involved in planning, implementation, evaluation of all policy, funding, and programmatic decisions. And I think that starts a lot of conflicts for me, but that's how this work is. That's the best way to do it, is to empower those who are living with HIV and our allies. But that's the best way to do the work. So that speaks to both Blackout and the Black Treatment Advocates Network.
I love that. And I love how you are using your own experience to like continue to drive the work and push things forward. It makes me think about something I've heard people say. I don't know if y'all have heard this, but I've heard like the good programming that comes from grassroots initiatives, when it goes to government is where that good programming dies. And so it makes me think about how government entities, like, for example, our health departments, take programs that community does and try to adapt it, and how it translates with them doing the work. We've seen some programs that have come from community, like the free breakfast program that was created by the Black Panther Party. We've seen stuff like that work, but it has its own challenges. So I think about that, and I want to ask you, Lonnetta, what is your thought about this? Like, hearing government is where like good grassroots programs go to die. What do you think about that? And then I have a follow-up question, because I want to hear more about the work y'all are doing with your End of the Epidemic or EHE work.
Yeah, I think I just want to start off by saying, I think Devin just said it all, was saying that just making sure that people living with HIV are at the forefront of everything that we do. And I think that's really how we tackle radical community care, just starting with that. And regarding your question into government taking some of those grassroots programs, I think it's important that places like the health department learn from that, right? So instead of taking those ideas and trying to shape it into these governmental and bureaucratic processes, let's do it opposite. Let's get out in the community and partner alongside of them. Let's reach out to those folks who are doing the work well. That's what we've been doing. We've been building relationships with those grassroots organizations and saying, how can we support you, right? Instead of us taking what you've got and trying to make it better. No, there's no point in that. You've already built these relationships. You already have that rapport. Nobody's having to walk into an office or some building that might be scary. The best way to do it is opposite, is learning from that, and really just working alongside of those folks who are already doing the work in community well.
Can you just share for a quick second, and I know, Edric, you're about to jump in, but Lonnetta, can you share a little bit more about your role within the health department and talk a little bit more about what y'all are doing in Tarrant County?
Yes, so of course, Tarrant County is one of the EHE jurisdictions, and my role is just kind of coordinating our Ending the Epidemic plan. So we spent a year working in community, bringing folks together of all walks, of course, people living with HIV, people from all different backgrounds, just a big diverse group of people that look like community to create our EHE plan. So right now we are in the implementation phase of that, and what that looks like is making sure folks know the work that we're doing, our super ambitious goals that we all have, doing things like normalizing testing and making sure folks are aware of stigma that's happening and have access to stigma resources and programs that we offer within the health department. So a lot of my job is some community engagement, some coordinating our implementation phase of our plan, and really just working with community to reach those goals.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a really fun and great conversation so far. So keep the comments coming in the chat, and thanks to our guests for sharing from their heart. So my question around this topic of community engagement, I think that's a word that's tossed around a lot, especially in HIV spaces. Well, so many of you have done the work to build trust in communities or build leaders in your organizations. So I'm just curious, and this can be for anyone, but what does that mean to you, this community leadership, how you actually build trust in those communities? I would love to hear from that, to learn about how other people can do that in their communities as well.
I'll jump in. Somebody else want to go?
No, go ahead, Dev. I'll go after you.
Okay, so I think that the initial interest should ideally always come from the community. And I guess a lot of people don't really see how that would happen organically, but it does. The community always has something to say. The community always wants to protect itself. And I think we've gotten, at least in certain institutions, we've gotten used to like kind of silencing those voices because they tend to be very critical of the work. But that's the energy that we need. That's the energy that's going to make a difference. And we need to also acknowledge the fact that HIV from the very beginning has always been, the work has always been initiated by grassroots effort. So I can at least say for the health department here locally, the health department knows who's vocal. They know who has an opinion and who's gonna wanna push back. But they've kind of, identified ways to like, tools and different ways to like silence people using Robert's rules or whatever, to have a meeting before the meeting, to, pull people to the side, to sway them in your direction. So the key is to not do that. That's the best advice I have. And again, include people living with HIV in programmatic policy and funding decisions. That's a new concept for a lot of people, but, concede some power.
Sorry, having a little technical difficulty there. I just want to say that one of the things that stands out to me when we're talking about this piece and relationships with local health departments, in the case of Blackout, we are a very small organization, but also very determined. And part of that for us means looking at funding opportunities that come our way and weighing them. As my granny used to say, all money ain't good money. And so sometimes what it is, and I think that Lonnetta kind of spoke to this, when it comes from the community, it's definitely very organic. But a lot of times what happens is when these programs go over to funding to health departments, what they're seeking really is control. And for an organization like ours, we have just sort of eschewed, if you will, funding from our local health department, even for EHE dollars. Now, most recently, they approached us and said, hey, we know we need Blackout at the table. And it just happens that right before I hopped on here, I was looking at the email I got with our local prevention tracker. And of all the ASOs who are funded, millions of dollars to help engage, for example, Black MSM or Black same gender loving men PrEP, I'm looking at this report and there were 0 Black men MSM engaged in PrEP navigation services in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. 0 in a city with a population in our metro area of 1.2 million people. However, Blackout does not report its numbers. Blackout had 30. We got, in just from August of last year to the end of the year, 30 Black same gender loving men engaged on PrEP and now participating in our PrEP adherence intervention that we've developed. But that's what can happen when people get out of the way. So when our health department came to us and said, hey, we know you're doing the work, how can we participate? We said, we want an equitable arrangement. So we're not interested in just having dollars, hung in our face and we're just supposed to jump at it and booty shine and step and fetch for it. That's not our interest at all. We want to figure out how we can be empowered and how the work that we're doing can be elevated and replicated, both here as well as nationally.
I believe in the invest divest model. So I think we need to pull some funding that's being mismanaged from those programs.
And in fact, I'll add to that, that one of our
Mhm.
values for the organization is that, and I don't want to dominate the space here, but one of our values is that it's not about, just feckless defiance. We believe in strategic resistance. And so sometimes our unwillingness to come to the table is because not only do we not like what's being served, we believe that it may be poison for us. And so therefore we're not going to partake.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And I think summarizes so much of how a lot of communities are feeling. Jesse, you really did such amazing on the ground work. And I would just love to hear how you built trust with the girls that you serve, to be able to have this unique relationship of offering them housing, but also some of the other services that y'all are providing at THC.
Yeah, so the question of trust is definitely a big one in the trans community. I feel like a lot of trans folks, because of our traumas, do not trust folks, even within our own communities, especially folks experiencing homelessness. I mean, you can't trust anyone on the streets. So building that trust for folks who have this trauma is difficult. And yeah, it took, months of me, just visiting the girls, just visiting them every day, hanging out with them on the pavement, even walking the stroll with them a few times, being, with them in their shoes for them to build that trust. And before I even, engage them in, hey, do you need support with this? Do you need me to help you take you to your appointments to get tested? But then once we developed that trust and that relationship, once they, started calling me mom, once they started calling me sister, we had that repertoire, and I was able to help them because we had that layer of trust. And then it got to the point where I was right now, because I knew, if I wasn't gonna be there to show up for them, no one else would. And it was incredible to see, because they lived on the streets right in the middle of Midtown, where there's 8 Atlanta, literally on that same street. And I was like, when I would take them to their appointments, always had issues, because of identification. There's always, it was a constant battle with the folks there, giving them care. But I asked them, like, do y'all really not do outreach when you have a community of Black trans sex workers like living in this area? Like, I mean, it was just mind-boggling to me that, federally funded, organizations, I mean, and that's kind of the point, that, there isn't enough federal dollars being invested in, that community outreach, that community engagement. And, folks just have to do that on their own, within their own communities. But when we founded THC, it was very essential that we had folks from the community working with the girls. So, our first case manager was Jamie Steger, who's been working in the community it down for us. And the girls, relate to her because, as she says, she's walked the walk. She's been in their shoes. And, that's the best way to engage with folks. That's been, and, or with lived experience. So that's how, we were able to maintain that trust with the folks that we work with.
I love that, Jesse. And I really appreciate you sharing like the real experiences in working with either case workers or case managers on the ground. That type of relationship makes me also think about like how aware are organizations like yours about the funding that is in your city to address some of these issues. Like I know Atlanta is one of the phase 1 jurisdictions, and they have received thousands, if not millions of dollars to do what has been called like disruptive innovation. So I wonder, have you even heard about this money? And if so, like how has your either health department or whoever is overseeing your housing programs, how are they engaging you in this process?
So since, I mean, I haven't heard of that specific federal program, but being thrusted into this and starting to navigate these federal systems has been very frustrating. But it's also frustrating because there is a lot of money being pumped, you know, given to the city, given into these larger organizations, but it's not reaching the folks most affected. So, you know, there is housing vouchers, there is, you know, there is PrEP, but it's just not reaching the communities that it needs to reach. Like a great example that I was going to bring up is HOPWA. You know, a big majority of our clients, you know, are HIV positive, and HOPWA is the only federal intervention for housing for folks living with AIDS. But it's one of the main programs that has the problems with funding in the city, inconsistencies. I'm sure y'all have heard what happened with Jerusalem House. I believe last year, they're the largest provider of housing for folks living with HIV, and they had to miss rent payment on all 436 of their units for the first time in 12 years because the city of Atlanta hadn't dispersed the funding. So the thing with HIV is, you know, now that we have PrEP and now that we have retrovirals, you know, they're saying, you know, it's not a death sentence, affected and still dying from HIV, you know, and who are homeless, you know, may not have access to the care in the same way that affluent white cisgender men do. You know, it may not be the same case. And according to information that I've received, HOPWA is actually set to be reduced by 75% in the next 5 years. So it's quite frustrating working within the system and trying to, you know, clamor at these resources. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're out there. So it's like getting it to the right people is one of the biggest struggles.
Can I jump in here, Crystal? Jesse, first of all, I just, much as Devin did earlier, want to just affirm and reaffirm you. You are a beautiful soul, and I can already tell that about you. And part of what resonates with me from what you were saying is that you know, you go the extra mile for your clients, and I think that is a common part of this. We have to go the extra mile. You know, there was a time when we were doing some programming when I was at that fairly qualified health center before I started Blackout, and we did this big event, a photo voice exhibition of Black same-gender loving men who were, you know, coming public with their, not only their sexual status or orientation, but also with their HIV status. And a lot of the case managers are really frustrated when we had the big opening and hundreds of people were there, like, oh, there's some of our clients were there, but I can't get them to show up for appointments. And I told them, that's because at 5 o'clock when you check out, we're still in touch with them. These are our friends, maybe lovers or former partners. These are people that are part of our community. We're going to see them at the store, in the neighborhood. They're dating our friends. Like, we are a part of this community. And so we don't have the luxury of checking out and going home. And so when I hear you say, Jesse, which you're so right, people say all the time, well, HIV is no longer a death sentence. I agree, it's not, if you know your status, if you're in care, if you have the things that will help facilitate your care. And for me, I believe that housing is HIV treatment and care. Transportation, employment, all of that, food security is HIV treatment and care. And I think a lot of times what happens is these other organizations have really figured out how to do the form and the function. And small organizations like ours are left to try to navigate it, bringing our own knowledge of the communities that we serve and trying to fit that within the context of these rigid grant guidelines that are never written for us anyway. For example, you could be a small organization and one of the grant requirements might be, oh, you have to have an audit. Well, if you're under a few $100,000 a year, an audit doesn't even make financial sense for you to do. So that's one way that a barrier can be erected. I just want to say two other quick things and I promise I'll be quiet. But in order to organize and indeed mobilize in our communities, one of the things I've come to fully appreciate is that we have to make sure that we understand that it is an everyday earning and risking of the credibility that it takes to be able to lead in our communities. And that we go the extra mile, because if we don't, then we'll be viewed by the community members as being no different than the people who already don't go the extra mile. We cannot afford that. We have to. And we do it the way poor people have always done it. We figure it out, we innovate, and we don't take no for an answer.
I love that. And I saw a comment in the chat Lauren, did you want to say this out loud? Because I think this is really, really important.
Hey, y'all. My name's Lauren. I'm really enjoying y'all's conversation, and I guess I'm just kind of cheerleading in the background and hollering at my screen every so often. Jesse, Rashawn, I hear everything that you guys are saying, and I totally agree. I work with a Ryan White funded planning council, and one of the members that is very near and dear to my heart, she is very fond of telling me, how are we supposed to get things done for people living with HIV when we have to deal with red tape, blue tape, purple tape, green tape, black tape, all the tape? And I say, yes, ma'am, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sorry. And I feel so helpless, like my hands are tied. And then to hear you guys and the great work that you're doing and that you're trying to do, compared to the work that we're trying to do, it's like, oh, here's all this money for you to spend, but we're going to make it really difficult to spend it. And we're going to put all these restrictions in place so that by the time work actually gets done, it's been so watered down that it's not real work anymore. And then you have folks like you guys and girls that are getting things done, and they're getting things done the way that we want to see them get done. And then it's too difficult for y'all to fight these federal systems and get this funding. And it's crazy. You know that show Shark Tank, where they have the people that are there with the deep pockets, and then they have the people that are there that have the ideas. I don't know why we can't have something like that, where we have these established places that have the staff and have the money to do the minutia and deal with the red tape and the grant work, and connect those people with the people like y'all that are on the ground getting the work done, so that y'all can continue focusing on that and doing those things, and somebody else can take care of, excuse my French, the bullshit. You know, how else is it going to work? I don't see any other way for it to work. Anyway, thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's a really good question for Lonnetta to address. Like, how are you creating opportunities that actually fund communities already doing the work, to do what they're doing and get through some of that red tape? And I just want to point out, like, if you are a health department or if you are receiving any EHE money, you should be prioritizing communities most impacted and paying them to labor. You should not be asking them to do a thing without any type of economic justice. That's period, full stop. So, Lonnetta, how are you getting past some of the red tape?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. We're making sure that we're prioritizing communities of color in our plan and the work that we're doing. But I also want to go back to what Rashawn said earlier. Like, I feel like I could learn so much from him. I appreciate him mentioning that he has the ear of those folks at the health department, where he's at, and having those conversations of you know, what that looks like and what they will accept and what they can and can't do. So I appreciate that, and I hope that the community partners that we work with feel the same way. I feel like how we're doing that now is we are making sure that we're prioritizing those communities of color, that we are walking them through those steps. Like, if we know that they're interested in applying or interested in the funding or applying for funding or seeking out other funding, we are super receptive of how we go about linking them to funding sources and showing them how to go about doing that, and like training them so that they don't feel like they're doing this alone, because it looks really different when these grassroots organizations are wanting to apply for money than some of these larger organizations with more staff and capacity and folks that are used to this type of work. They can do it with their eyes closed. So we're making sure that we spend a lot of intentional time with those other groups so that we're setting them up for success, because we don't want them to fail. They're already doing great work. We just want to come side and help elevate the work that they're doing, not take credit for, not steal, not put our names behind it, just work with them to elevate what they're already doing well.
I love that. And I feel like this might be like really simple, but I want to ask you, because sometimes I do recognize that health departments need examples of how other health departments are doing this. And so how are you walking them through? Is it, creating virtual meetings where you're talking about the funding that you have? Because like Jesse said, Jesse didn't even know that there was funding to do innovative work beyond like the everyday, like prep or treat. Like people don't even know that exists. So how are you all ensuring that community knows about it without it being just a checkbox? We did community engagement. Like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I noticed that when Jesse said, I'm like, wow, like, oh, I hope I'm doing a good job of that. I'm learning so much just from this conversation. But for us, we have been intentional about being a part of groups that we weren't traditionally a part of. So if our homeless coalition meets, guess what? We're at those meetings. If our area aging of disability, if those folks are meeting, we want to be a part of those conversations too. We're trying to do a lot of networking, which is kind of difficult in COVID, but we really are just trying to plant ourselves in groups that we weren't historically a part of, and letting them know, hey, this is what's going on in our world. Same with our sororities, right? We're trying to build relationships there and allow them to be a part of some of the work. So it really is just working, just thinking outside of the box and getting out of the health department, right, if you will, and implanting ourselves in community, in groups that are already doing good work, and letting them know what we're doing and kind of seeing how we can align, because I feel like that's really, really important. If not, we'll just continue working with the same agencies that we've been working for, and that won't get us to our goals.
I just want to quickly say for Blackout, and I do work with other orgs, but for Blackout, seeking health department funding has been a last resort. I just want to throw that out there. There are other ways, better ways.
I have to echo that. We've been very, I feel like Devin baited me with that, but that was such a good point he made. We have been very selective. And I'll be honest, it's important to me that looking at, there in Houston or there in Tarrant County, like here are Black women that are in leadership. And Lonnetta, I just want to say that it sounds to me like just your cognition and your awareness around these issues tells me that your community is probably very pleased with the job you're doing. But I have to say that, I'll just put it plainly, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And we've had a change in our leadership here for our local Ryan White Planning Council. And it's actually been white leaders who have really, in a very culturally humble sort of way, invited us to the table. And so what I've said all along is that a lot of times funders want to give us money because they want to be able to drive down the street and say, oh, look at the pretty yellow flowers we put in their front yard. Well, I'm not worried about the flowers in the front yard. I'm trying to make sure the foundation's solid, the roof don't leak, and there's food on the table. And once we get that together, then I'm okay with standing out on the porch and talking to other folks in a very socially distant, socially responsible kind of way. But the point being that with our local health department, we very reluctantly accepted the invitation to apply for EHE funding for the reasons that we've already discussed. And there was a technical glitch and they didn't get our application, and even though it was submitted on time. And so the very next morning, I got a text message from the grantee saying, oh my God, we're so disappointed that Blackout didn't submit. How can we fix this? We'd like to know why it was unappealing. I was like, no, actually we did, and they found it. But the point being that until they see value in us as an equal partner, we are just not interested, and we will find a way, as we have, to feed ourselves. And I think that is the key to so much of this, because it's the golden rule. And most of us know the golden rule. One of my mentors, who's a wealthy person, asked me one time, Rashawn, do you know the golden rule? I was like, yes. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And she was like, yes, that is the golden rule. However, in philanthropy, there's another one. He who has the goal makes the rules. And as long as that paradigm is in place, it doesn't support grassroots organizations like Jesse's or ours being able to move forward in the ways that we best know how to serve our communities.
I love that. If I could just also just chime in and say that in our approach to, and I don't want it to make it look like we're only selling our EHE funding, because no, that doesn't help community. So we're totally committed in helping those organizations find funding, period. When we hear about it, we're making sure that those folks that qualify or that could be interested in it, that they have access to it again, and we still walk them through that process. Because like you said, at the end of the day, we're all working towards a goal, regardless of how, if those organizations want to work with us. Of course we want to, but if that's not what's best for them and there's another route to do that, that's fine. Like, we're happy to support them in serving the community.
Thank you all. Yeah, y'all are all really doing amazing work and putting your people first and doing it with so much dignity. It's inspiring to hear that. You know, right now, I think there's an opportunity on the federal level, since we have a new administration, to ask for some of the resources or at least guidance of what is actually going to get us to end HIV with the goals set by the last administration. So we have these 4 pillars, right? We've got the diagnose, the treat and prevent and respond to HIV as a federal strategy. But, you know, those are really biomedical focused, and they love to talk about how they're doing it through a syndemic approach that's really going to look at the structural determinants of health and figure out how to respond using these tools to all of the inequities and all of this mistrust, lack of information being out there that we see. So if anyone could take this question, if y'all were to add a pillar to the HIV strategy, or just add something in general, what would that be? What's missing from this federal strategy to actually end HIV across communities in the US?
Men seem to jump in first in general, like.
Well, since you got the mic, you might as well use it, Devin.
So, I mean, in addition didn't come to mind, but a subtraction definitely did. When we're talking about pillar number 4, which refers to molecular surveillance. And Edric, you also mentioned, was it the social determinants of health? Well, in Missouri, the health department is required to provide the prosecution with any surveillance information pertaining to an alleged HIV exposure. If someone claims that the person with HIV did not disclose, and they face up to 30 years. So pillar number 4 is really built around cluster detection, molecular surveillance. That means that we have a whole network of data that is connecting one person's HIV strain to a whole network of other people's HIV strains. And it's very dystopian, it's very scary, and that's not responsive to the social determinants of health, especially if we're talking about Black people, if we're talking about sex workers, if we're talking about people who use drugs, people who are already criminalized. That's doing the opposite of what we're supposed to do, and that does not build trust. So I think that we really need to get rid of that pillar for several reasons. Also, the fact that that takes place without the knowledge or consent of people living with HIV. So I would say that's not responsive to the social determinants of health.
I'm like, wow. I really appreciate you for bringing that in to the conversation. And I just want to highlight for those that don't know or are not familiar about the pillars. After we leave here, we're going to post a link on Facebook on the air, so that you can take a look at the local areas that are receiving money and do have funding to support programming focused on ending the epidemic. And you know, you all have the ability and flexibility to determine what that looks like. So we'll make sure you get that. And then also, like, getting rid of that pillar, I was like, you know, nobody ever talked about that, or I haven't heard anybody bring that up. I've heard people say we need to add a few more, but just to be clear, like, those pillars were created not by Black people. We don't know who was in the room, who was in the room, because I've heard it was like white men who created this plan that was just like, here you go, do the work, and we'll throw some money at it. I thought that was really powerful. I want to see who else has some reflections, thoughts before we close out too.
I would, not regarding adding to the conversation, I think what I would do is, I feel like we do a good job of working in our silos, right? In our pillars, in our boxes, our prevention and care. And for our community, we've really been trying to be the bridge of kind of that status neutral approach. And I wish there was a heavier emphasis on that and making sure that regardless of what that test reads, that there are equitable resources on both sides of the continuum. So that would be really important to me, is making sure that folks on the prevention side still had access to things that folks on the care side also have, making sure that we're taking care of everyone, the entire community, in a holistic approach.
I just want to say very briefly, I know we're speeding to a close here, but I think one of the things that if there's been any secret to the secret sauce for Blackout, it has been that we are relational and not transactional, and that the entire EHE funding and strategy is about a transaction. It's about eliminating, eradicating, ending HIV. But the problem is that we view HIV through the lens of people. And so when we're in that kind of space or with that sort of perspective, it causes us to see the problem and not the people. And so we lead with people first. Like, seriously, it's all about the community first. So that's a critical piece of it for me. And I think that if we're not trying to establish new leadership corps in these different cities or states where they're getting this EHE money, then we will ultimately be back where we have always been, because essentially what it does is it recreates the same kind of colonial relationships, the same kind of patriarchal relationships that are already in existence. And I'll just say finally that Jesse and Idrik, it sounds like you are both in Atlanta. My siblings all live down there. My parents are moving down there. In fact, I just dropped my mom and grandmother off at the airport there this morning. My dad will leave on Saturday. So I would love to connect with you all and see what I can learn from your work and how I can support you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Jesse, did you want to add anything to help close us out?
Sure. What came to mind is I feel like when dealing with the few experiences I've had dealing within the with HIV providers agencies in Atlanta, I feel like it's like Rashad was saying, it's very transactional, not people based, and it's very only focused on either treatment or prevention, and not the whole wraparound services, which is what a lot of agencies in general, especially housing agencies, lack the wraparound services, which is what THC, is founded on, the housing first model, the expectation that all folks deserve housing with no preconditions or barriers or loopholes. And we believe that, housing first, although it's been around for decades, it isn't completely put into practice in a lot of in a lot of real world situations, and that includes with these agencies, when giving these services, I don't think there's a comprehensive wraparound approach. I don't know when it comes to referral to housing, with several like I said, several of our clients are HIV positive, and they've been in and out of these agencies that got them in, treated them once or gave them a test once, and then that's it. There's no follow-up, if there's a referral, there's no follow-up for that. There's it's not intentional. So yeah, just focusing on the wraparound services, and not looking at anything as a single issue, because it's not. It's all interconnected. And yeah, housing is one of the biggest preventions for HIV.
Thank you all. These concepts seem so simple, right? But they could revolutionize the ways in which we have an HIV ending the epidemic strategy, right? What would it look like to put people first? What would it look like to put housing first? I know we're at time, so thank you again to all of our guests. We'll definitely follow up offline with you all. And please send me anything that you'd like me to put on our Facebook and share after this episode, any resources. It is Trans Day of Visibility, so a call to action for everyone listening on Facebook or joining us today is give back to the trans communities in your area. And like Crystal said earlier, we'll post some of the Ending the Epidemic federal data, so y'all can take a look at that on our Facebook as well if you have questions around that. So feel free to join us next month. Always the last Wednesday of the month, we have On the Air with ANEA. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Great.
I
Thanks
really
all for the
love
work you do.
this conversation. Thank you so much.
Mhm.